All right, today we're going to dive into a really fascinating and, frankly, pretty challenging psychological analysis. We're going to look at the public figure of Donald Trump through a Jungian lens, focusing on this powerful, kind of spooky concept, the collective shadow. So this is the question that kicks the whole thing off. It's super provocative, right? This isn't really about left versus right. It's a much deeper psychological question about the strange and powerful bond between a leader and the parts of a nation's mind that it keeps hidden. The source we're looking at starts with this powerful idea. You know how certain images or events just get stuck in your head? They don't just fade away. The idea here is that they actually awaken these buried fears and lodge themselves deep inside our minds, almost like a psychological trigger for something much, much bigger. And that leads us right to the core of this whole analysis. From this point of view, Donald Trump isn't just an individual politician. He is what the source calls a symbolic carrier. Think of him as a kind of vessel, or a magnet, for all the repressed, unacknowledged stuff churning away in a nation's subconscious. Okay, so to get this, we absolutely have to define the key term from the psychologist Carl Jung, the shadow. The easiest way to think about it is it's everything we refuse to see in ourselves. The anger, the greed, the messy desires we decide are not me. We try to push it all down into the basement of our mind, but it doesn't just disappear. In fact, it just gets stronger down there in the dark. Now, here's a really crucial insight from the source, and this is what makes the shadow so tricky. It doesn't pop up and say, hey, I'm your evil side. No way. It disguises itself as righteousness. It's that little voice in your head that convinces you that your absolute worst impulses are not only okay, but completely justified. So if the shadow's big trick is convincing us we're right, what happens when it gets challenged? What does it do when someone tries to shine a light on it? How does it protect itself? Well, according to this analysis, the ego basically panics. It deploys a whole set of tactics. It flat out denies facts. It rationalizes bad behavior, and, a big one, it viciously attacks the person who's pointing out the problem. It tries to reframe reality itself, and, this is key, it claims that it's the one being victimized. So when you hear political language like hoax or witch hunt, from this perspective, those are classic shadow defense mechanisms playing out on a massive scale. Okay, so now let's take this framework and apply it directly to Donald Trump. The analysis we're exploring puts forward a really unique theory about his psychological makeup and his personal relationship with his own shadow. This chart really gets to the heart of the argument. The source suggests that a mature psyche is always in a state of internal struggle, It's held in check by things like shame, doubt, and self-reflection. But the analysis of Donald Trump's public persona points to a total absence of that inner conflict. It's not that he's fighting his shadow. It's that he appears to just be it, fully and completely, all while believing he's the good guy. And this is such an important distinction. The point isn't that he has no shadow. Everybody has one. The argument here is that the shadow has been so totally absorbed into his conscious personality, into his ego, that there's no separation anymore. He's not aware of it. It's like the guardrails of guilt or self-doubt have been completely removed. Now, when a whole society is feeling stressed out and anxious, it can regress and start looking for these really powerful, almost primitive figures to save it. And this is where another Jungian idea comes into play, the archetype of the primal father. This is a figure who stands above the law, who is exempt from the rules, and whose sheer force of will is supposed to be reality. And if you look at the traits linked to this archetype, they're pretty telling. This figure never, ever apologizes. He doesn't explain himself. He completely rejects the idea of shared rules or standards. He just asserts his power again and again and again. And his speech, it's not based on logic or facts. It's mythic. It's designed to create a new reality, not to debate the one we're in. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about the individual leader, but what happens when that leader's personal shadow dynamic starts to spread, when it infects an entire group of followers? This is where the source introduces the concept of group possession. And here's the turning point. This is the moment things get really dangerous. When any kind of criticism, any kind of accountability is automatically relabeled as an unfair attack, as persecution, a really profound shift happens. The group completely loses its ability to correct its own course because the very thing it needs for self-correction, critical feedback, has just been defined as an attack from the enemy. You can actually see the process laid out step by step. It starts with some kind of valid criticism. That criticism is immediately reframed as persecution. Then the person or group bringing the criticism gets attacked. Pretty soon, loyalty to the leader becomes way more important than any objective ethical standard. And once you're there, the group is basically flying blind, with no ability to see its own mistakes. Wow, this quote from the source just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It captures that final stage perfectly. The entire moral compass of the group shifts. The most important question isn't, is what we're doing right or wrong anymore? It's, does this action protect the leader? At that point, ethics have totally collapsed into just allegiance. So, where does this all lead? According to this analysis, it brings an entire society to a really stark and unavoidable choice. It's a moment of psychological reckoning. And we're not just talking about a political crossroads here. From this Jungian point of view, it's a fundamental choice about how a collective mind, a whole society, is going to deal with the darkness that's been dragged out into the open, and the stakes couldn't be higher. And here are the two paths laid out. Path 1 is called integration. That path requires humility, a real commitment to truth, accountability, and the courage to actually look your own shadow in the face. Path 2 is collapse, and that's the path of more denial, more projecting your own faults onto others, more rage, and retreating deeper into that mythic defense of the leader. And this leads us to what is maybe the most unsettling conclusion in the entire analysis. It argues that the intense focus on one man, on Donald Trump, actually misses the bigger picture. From this perspective, he didn't create the collective shadow. He is a symptom of it. He's a figure who came along and amplified it and became its perfect avatar. So, at the end of the day, the ultimate warning from this analysis is crystal clear. This is bigger than one election cycle, it's bigger than one leader. It's presented as a civilizational challenge. If a society constantly refuses to look at its own darkness, then sooner or later that darkness is going to be in charge. And so we end right where we started, but with a question from the source that pushes everything one step further. What happens when it's not just about denying the darkness anymore? What happens when a society actually starts to fall in love with the very thing it used to be afraid of? It's a pretty disturbing thought to leave you with, and one that asks us to think about the powerful currents moving just beneath the surface of our world.